Welcome everyone. This is CK from All Things Connected. Today's session is on Africa, the next billion, leapfrogging with innovation, emerging tech, and collaboration.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. To a more global audience, a person who is outside Africa, think of Africa as a continent owning an enormous quantity of natural resources. These resources, the first thing that comes to our mind is diamonds. So Africa is very well known for its diamond mines. We can also thank to Bollywood movies, I guess, for this the kind of information that is spread across the world about Africa. Also, Africa is very well known for its minerals, gold, iron, cobalt, uranium, copper, bauxite, just to name a few, petroleum. Africa is also known for agriculture products, lots of farming, family-based farming, or the farmer lands. They are there. Products such as sugar, salt, cocoa beans, woods, tropical fruits. Now, even more richer products are coming in the sense of marine products. For example, fisheries, exotic marine delicacies. I was just reading about sea cucumber that is very much emerging as a promising product, which is very high demand in China nowadays. So these kind of things that come to our mind when we think about Africa. But such resource richness, unfortunately, attracted vicious intentions in the past as well through the colonization period. And like Asia, Africa also bears the scar of this turbulent, tough time in the past when Africa has been colonized by outside nations, exploiting African resources, not to the benefit of the local population there, but to the benefit of outside nations. So that bringing the kind of challenges even sustains today. And due to that turbulent past, many countries in Africa face the challenge pertaining to security, political instability. However, the things are changing in Africa, and so far, the African market that has been considered as a more volatile, tough market for secure investment purpose, the notion is changing. We can give some credit to China here. China began to promote investment in Africa, and according to latest figures, like June 2020, biggest creditor to Africa is China. So estimated 145 billion US dollars has been lended to African government by China. So they have started various projects to build the infrastructure and more technology-savvy ecosystem in Africa. However, these things are changing because of COVID situation, that is happening today worldwide. In terms of Africa, COVID-19 arrived in Africa on February 14th, 2020, when the first case was reported. I think it was in Egypt. And since then, WHO has cautioned that the situation could be an alarming situation in Africa due to the healthcare systems and the kind of previous experiences that Africa has seen in the past 2-3 decades in terms of other pandemic or epidemic outbreaks. And the kind of situation is the organization WHO is kind of projecting that the situation Africa could be the next epicenter of the pandemic. So the kind of social consequences could be more serious. However, this grim situation when it comes to economic impact of the pandemic on African countries has been less destructive. So I will mention 3 key points here. First, a very positive outlook has been projected on the growth forecast So according to Bloomberg, 6 African countries are among the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world in 2020. This is fantastic because a number of economists contributing to Bloomberg recently cut their 2020 forecast for a world from a 3% growth to a decline of 3.7%. Some economies even expected to contract by 7%, which is a huge number. However, the drop is less extreme for Africa, and this would position Africa among the 6 best performing regions in 2020. The second positive outlook, economic outlook on Africa is that Africa represents the best appreciating equity market after Eastern Europe. While shares from North America, Western Europe, Asia Pacific reportedly contributed 3, 2, and 1% to world benchmarks 8% losses, Africa contributed only 0.24%, which is among the best performing regions, and similar to Eastern Europe, which stands at 0.2%. So Africa is really doing great in that aspect as well. And the third positive economic outlook on Africa is that Africa has a booming communication industry. The communication sector in sub-Sahara Africa in 2020 is the leading industry in Africa, with a total return of 22% compared to 9% earned by global health companies, which is #1 performing industry thus far in the world. So with these promising outlooks, Africa is the biggest economic and financial surprise in these turbulent times. The African continent has definitely grasped the promise of Industry 4.0, with the trends for emerging technologies helping to drive progress in many parts of the world. Africa is now embracing technological changes and even leading the way with innovation. In the last 15 years or so, Africa has witnessed a vast technological revolution, with companies ready to innovate, and people are also very open to embrace this new innovation technology. And I was just hearing one news that now Africa will also invest lots in the smartphone market, and they will produce the smartphones locally rather than importing from outside. So this set of the technological immersion that is happening in Africa is well sought for. So today we are going to talk about discuss the activities that are driving digital initiatives and ideas, technologies, and from the policy perspective as well. So today's session will be a very information savvy, in the sense that we have 3 prominent speakers who are currently residing in that region and have hands-on experience in how things are shaping up in that region. So let me introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Rachel Sibande, who is a Program Director of Data for Development in DIAL at the United Nations Foundation. Our second speaker is Mr. Omar Jagne, Team Lead and the Head of Experimentation, UNDP, the Gambia Accelerator Lab. And lastly, Esther Kunda, who is a Policy, Innovation and Community of Scientists Manager in the Next East Einstein Forum. So without further ado, I would like to invite Rachel to start today's session. And thank you so much, Rachel, for joining today. Over to you now.
My name is Rachel, and I'm based out of Pretoria, South Africa, but I'm originally from Malawi. It's also called the warm heart of Africa because of the warmth and friendliness of its people. As Neha said, I currently work for the United Nations Foundation as Program Director, leading our Data for Development portfolio in Africa, really leveraging the power of big data in answering some of society's biggest challenges and problems across public health, food security, disaster management, just to mention a few. But today I'm here to speak in my capacity as founder of Malawi's first technology hub and incubator, and it's called MHub. This is an initiative that I set up some 5-6 years ago. I was inspired after taking a journey to the United States of America as one of President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative at the time, and having come across the concept of a hub or an incubator. And because naturally I'm a technology scientist by training, I thought of coming back home and setting up a technology hub that would be solely focused on building young technology entrepreneurs, but also how to support other entrepreneurs outside of the technology space embed technology and its power of efficiencies and delivery within their business models. So our three main pillars are technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So basically, we champion the development of local technology solutions that solve social problems, but we also offer entrepreneurship and technical skills to some of the emerging entrepreneurs. Our mantra is to build a generation of young people that can transcend from job seekers to job creators, that can transcend from users of technology to creators of technology, to have entrepreneurs that can integrate the power of technology within their various business spaces. The picture you see there is a group of young people, particularly girls, that we were training on how to build robots. We've got a special focus on girls and women because, as you'd appreciate, there are very few women and girls represented within the technology domain elsewhere in the world. And also being a woman founder, it sort of became almost necessary for me to ensure that we were bringing more young women and girls into the tech space ladder. So like I said, we're founded in 2014. So far, we have 15 full-time employees, but do get some on a part-time ongoing basis. Apart from having been established in Lilongwe, Malawi, we also have expanded to Zambia, which is a neighboring country here in Southern Africa with a much larger economy. Our experience has spanned development of technology solutions, but also running business incubation programs in integrating emerging, innovating entrepreneurs in Malawi, providing them with acceleration, financing, and investment readiness support. The key focus areas have been on technology, where we train children, we train girls, we train youth in general, we train women, basic digital skills, but also all the way through to advanced digital skills, such as how to develop mobile apps, how to build robots, and all other advanced tech skills that you would imagine. We also support startups and post-revenue entrepreneurs. Our focus for the startups and post-revenue entrepreneurs is different in the sort of support that we provide, but it really captures elements of training, mentorship, financing, and incubation. So in terms of some of our work, a lot has been done, but suffices to say that so far we've built over 30 innovative digital technology solutions, some of which have been deployed across 5 countries. We've also worked with clients who are outside of Malawi, helping us maybe to build some technology system for them. We've set up a robotics club. We've hosted Internet of Things boot camps to introduce some of our community members and tech enthusiasts to the concepts of robotics, concepts of IoT. We've also held data hackathons to solicit emerging innovative ideas around how these young tech enthusiasts can leverage the use of big data in answering some of the key questions of development. And like I also mentioned, we also have set up a children's coding club in ensuring that we can start building the interest in technology and the tech skills in the children from a very young age. So far, we've trained over 40,000 people across the country with technology and entrepreneurship skills. And some of the pictures you see there are just, snapshots of some of the young people that have come through our corridors. Just a snippet into some of our numbers in the year 2019 just gone by. We had over 277 entrepreneurs trained. Let me emphasize that as you see when I give examples going forward, some of these are very tech specific, whereas some of them are entrepreneurs that are not necessarily within the technology space. They could be in the food value chain, they could be in the aquaculture value chain, perhaps producing feed for fish, or some are actually producing organic fertilizer. But we found a way to integrate them with the tech entrepreneurs in finding means and ways in which they can integrate technology within their businesses. We've also offered over $363,000 in financing to these entrepreneurs using a core matching grant mechanism, where we put in up to $40,000 for each entrepreneur that meets the criteria, and they match it with about 10 to 20%. This is an initiative that has been supported by the UNDP and the Royal Norwegian Embassy, but we've also brought along other investment partners such as commercial banks to provide financing to these entrepreneurs, because these are some of the challenges that they face in terms of scaling their products and services to the market. I wanted to mention that 31% of the entrepreneurs that have accessed the $363,000 financing are actually women-led entrepreneurs. Initially, in the year before 2019, which was in 2018, we had 55% of women-led entrepreneurs accessing finance. Our goal is really to ensure that we lead by example in ensuring that we are integrating women-led enterprises in advancing, gender equality, and also in following through research that shows that women-led entrepreneurs are also well managed. So far in 2018 alone, we had 308 jobs created. These are direct jobs, but when you start thinking of jobs that were created across the value chain, maybe you have a multiplier effect of maybe times 20 of that number. So you could be talking about over 6,000 within the value chains. So far within our entrepreneur cohort, there are 69 new products that were developed in 2019 alone. I wanted to sort of take you through some of what we've been doing around building young technology creators and enthusiasts, and by showing you this photo of this 10-year-old boy as of 3 years ago when he met Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook's largest conference, F8. This is one of the products of our Children's Coding Club that I spoke about. Because of the training that he received, he was able to build a mobile application that translates text to speech, speech to text, at a time when this sort of technology was pretty much on the emergence. And he got a chance to win a national mobile app building contest that was being spearheaded by one of the mobile network operators, talking about the value of partnerships, and was thus flown to California to attend Facebook's largest F8 conference and had the opportunity to meet Mark Zuckerberg. And as you see, Mark Zuckerberg did post on his Facebook page saying, this 10-year-old Malawian boy had started coding earlier than Zuckerberg himself. These are the sort of stories that we love to hear and see, and hope to encourage a lot more young people to become technology creators and enthusiasts, to build technology solutions that can solve Africa's own problems, but not just Africa's own problems, but also solve global societal problems. And so far, we've trained over 4,800 children how to code. We train them basically how to build games, animations, and mobile apps. We've also taken on the initiative with support from Google and the Africa Code Week to train teachers across the country, because we realize that we need a sustainable mechanism for how to ensure that these children, even in the rural areas, can continuously be supported in their quest to learn digital skills. I also did mention that we have a special focus on girls. We're training them with basic digital skills, from basic access to the internet, basic use of the phone, how to manage hardware, all the way through to high-tech skills like coding, robotics, and IoT, or big data, to mention a few. Currently, we've had 48 technology entrepreneurs. These are like tech-specific entrepreneurs. They would be ranging from software developers to graphic designers, you name it, animators, that have been incubated. And recently, we just launched what we call a Technology Tribe Accelerator program for tech entrepreneurs. This is an initiative where these tech entrepreneurs can access acceleration program, investment readiness support, mentorship, training on particular facets of their businesses online using an online accelerator. And I suppose it makes more sense now with the COVID-19 restrictions. Some of the technology solutions that we have developed ourselves, because we consider ourselves as a social enterprise. What I mean by that is that we build technology solutions as a business to make a profit, and then we invest the income that we make from building tech solutions into our social good programs. Some of the social good programs are what I just mentioned, like the training of the children, the training of the girls in digital skills, training of women, training of entrepreneurs, incubating them. Most of those programs are not paid for. They are social good programs that are sustained by the profits that we make as a company, as a hub in building technology solutions. So some of the technology solutions that we have developed so far have cut across areas such as elections monitoring. We have built solutions for the civil society in countries like Malawi, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, to use in monitoring general elections. So for example, they deploy observers in all polling stations across the country during elections. We develop a mobile app that these observers can use to send in real-time reports on incidences as they happen during the election. And then we build a dashboard where the civil society stakeholders, the electoral management body, the security agencies can actually see in real time cases of violence, cases of voter bribery, or cases where there were no adequate voter materials, and any other indicators that are relevant to elections monitoring. After polls close, they can also track results, unofficial results, in real time as they come. Consequently, we've also built platforms for enhancing citizen engagement with service providers, where citizens can send in reports through SMS, through USSD, through a mobile app, on the delivery of essential services such as water, electricity, or sanitation in real time, to enhance the accountability of these service providers. So for example, the messages would be, we don't have water here, which is very common, or we don't have power, or indeed that, the garbage within a particular market has not been collected for days. So that enhances accountability and citizen engagement beyond the elections, but in leveraging the use of technology. We've also worked with partners like the UNDP previously in building platforms where they can monitor the SDGs of the country, but we've also built technology solutions for commercial clients, for example, such as Standard Bank. We are their technology partner, supporting them to build ad hoc technology solutions. For example, they run an initiative called the BMO Race, which is a marathon. And within that, they would want people to register online. They would want to track registrations. We build and support the technology solutions to support them with that. And now with COVID-19, there's been a need for them to actually move from holding, for example, their AGM physically to doing it virtually, and there's need for them to have a technical partner that can help them to do that. And that's some of the sort of services that we've been providing to some of our commercial clients. I wanted to finish off by sharing with you some of what we've been doing in accelerating innovative entrepreneurs that are not necessarily tech entrepreneurs. So for example, the one you see here is called Tantwe Farms. It's a women-led enterprise. She has been growing high-value crops such as bell peppers, cauliflower, hibiscus, and lemongrass in greenhouses. And she's been looking for investment readiness support and financing to scale her business to be able to construct a pack house and a tea factory, but also to enter the export market. Now, two things. First, we provided financing of up to $40,000 with support from the UNDP and the Royal Norwegian Embassy on a program called Growth Accelerator for her to be able to build the factory house and the packing house, but also for her to be able to purchase distribution equipment such as the van that you see. But having said that, from a technology perspective, we are now working with her to explore the question of, now that you are attaining scale, you are enhancing your products. For example, she's now producing the hibiscus tea and the lemongrass tea for the external market, for the export market. How can you integrate smart farming with IoT or artificial intelligence and big data within your greenhouses? Because within that, you know, there's the element of irrigation. She has to know what the moisture in the soil is, how the humidity is rated at a particular time, and whether it makes sense to actually water the plants or not. Is there a way that we can integrate smart farming with IoT, for example, within her farm to enhance production, to enhance efficiency and productivity? So these are some of the things that we're doing in an accelerating innovative entrepreneurs that may not necessarily be tech entrepreneurs, but where there is an opportunity for technology to enhance their productivity. Second example is also a women-led enterprise of a young lady who has is producing yogurt. She integrates a value chain of more than 200 low-income dairy farmers in the country. She needed investment readiness support and financing for her to construct a dairy factory, which could help her to increase her production. And what we are also exploring now is to say, fine, now that you've gotten this financing, you've extended your product, your yogurt product, to the market, you've built in more diversity within your product label. How can you leverage digital technology to enhance your production, to enhance your digital marketing? Because a lot of the marketing that she's been doing has been physical, like deploying people by the streets to sell this yogurt. But can she now leverage the power of digital marketing by using digital technologies to enhance productivity? So this is also some of the things that we do in supporting this sort of innovative entrepreneurs. Now, in closing, I just wanted to share, aside of all these success stories that we've seen, some of the challenges that we face and these young entrepreneurs that we incubate and accelerate face. First of all, there's lack of equipment. For example, with the emergence of COVID-19, there's been interest in young people to build facial visas or even indeed masks made out of 3D printers, but those are in short supply. The ones that we have are not fully functional. Just to mention that as an example, we are currently running a challenge calling on emerging innovative entrepreneurs with ideas around COVID-19 solutions. And this is one of the challenges that we see in that space, a lack of this high-tech equipment, like 3D printers. The internet tariffs in Malawi are extremely high and exorbitant. And so as the moment you start talking about anything digital, anything technology, this is one of your top challenges. I don't know how to solve that, but we have seen some ideas around, using balloons in the stratosphere to enhance access to 4G internet. Whatever it takes, we definitely need some sort of support there in driving those costs down. And of course, obviously, lack of investment financing options for these emerging entrepreneurs, both tech and non-tech entrepreneurs, to scale their products and services to the market, not just the local market, but even the external market, of which they currently lack exposure. And we hope that through this sort of interfaces and engagement with the external world, we can expose their work and our work more, to create sort of emerging partnerships with the external market that would be interested in partnering with some of these entrepreneurs, but also partnering with us as we build technology solutions and solve some of society's largest challenges. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone that was able to tune in, and to you, CK, for the invitation. You can go ahead with the next slide. We're just going to be presenting on leapfrogging with emerging technology in Africa. And the interest that has been shown in Africa from your part of the world, I think it's very timely. I guess I'll start in a very personal way and say that as somebody that's been in the diaspora for some time, coming back to Africa was something I think which was a bit of a calling, if you will. So when others are starting to see that, it's really reassuring, because the future is really one where there needs to be collaboration. The challenges are very shared, and as Rachel shared some of the challenges there, and I'm sure Esther will as well. It's the same issues that we're facing, maybe in just different variations. But one of the things that we do hear often when we talk about Africa is this rapid population growth. And I'll just go over some of these points and I'll talk about them. We have a population of approximately 1.2 billion. And by 2050, we're looking to exceed the 2 billion mark, right? So I put the rapid in parentheses, in quotations there, because I feel like there's a leveler which we also need to consider. But I'll talk about that as I address the second point, which is on the demographic dividend. Now we talk about a massive number of youth that are between the age range of 15 to 35, some stretch it all the way to 40. And we're wondering what's going to happen with all these young individuals as they enter the workforce, as things become more automated, right? What happens then? And that also links to then the third point about migration, and clandestine migration in particular, which perpetuates a problem that we've been experiencing for quite some time. And that's the problem of the brain drain. My own country, the Gambia, a very small country, about 10, 15 years ago, we were experiencing losses of approximately $1 billion a year due to the brain drain. That number has increased to 3 to 5 billion a year because of tertiary level experience and trained professionals opting for opportunities outside of the continent. And oftentimes, we can cite this to not necessarily personal reasons, but reasons that are beyond their control. Whether it's political issues, whether it's besides the economic opportunity, of course, whether it's maybe even sometimes religious freedom. I mean, we saw what happened in Central African Republic. So there's many, many reasons why this issue of migration, coupled with the brain drain, just spells, not to sound bleak in this early part of the day for us in this part of the world, but it sounds like a very bleak future. So one thing that one must consider now is, okay, what's causing this migration, right? And for me, the leveler that I talked about earlier is about in countries like China and India, which are massive countries, and each of them has a population of over a billion people. They've managed that growth sustainably over a long period of time. We're talking about a continent, and later on, I think the audience will maybe appreciate what I'm trying to say here more, that is massive. People fail to understand just how massive Africa is. So when I hear a lot of commentary on how, there's rapid population growth all across the continent, I mean, Nigeria's population is booming, and then Ethiopia and Egypt. Yes, that is true. But at the end of the day, one also has to look at the context in full. And in another slide, I'll be able to drive this point home better. But essentially, we need to take it with a grain of salt, just to use a very urban term there, in thinking about how this population growth is affecting us. So the diaspora is also you can call it a sixth region, as the AU likes to refer to it. The African diaspora is one of the biggest in the world. And recently with this movement, the Black Lives Matter movement stemming out of the US, we see just how important and how big this movement is. And this all ties in very well to what's happening with these emerging techs and how that could be used in the African continent. One would be surprised to know that, many of the innovations or many of the frontier inventions that we're talking about, they did have a level of involvement from those in the African diaspora. An example being the Chevy Volt. That's a best-selling sedan in the US, and the engineer that was able to make that happen was a Nigerian immigrant in the US. And when we talk about that, we link to immigration, and then we see that at least a lot of what we're talking about, whether it be politics, whether it be in technology and innovation, indeed, we do have a lot of South Asian, in particular, immigrants moving to the US and leading now even a lot of these big techs that we're talking about, examples being with Google and Microsoft. So, you know, trying to just paint this picture is to say that, yes, there is rapid urbanization going on. Yes, there is rapid population growth, you know, happening in Africa, but it needs to be looked at holistically. And, you know, the last point that I added there was on the issue of energy and internet connectivity, which Rachel already addressed. We have a humongous demographic within the 15 to 40 bracket. And these individuals are all having access to basic phones essentially now. The penetration rate for mobile phones in Africa is through the roof. In most cases, above 80%. In my own Gambia, it's about 94%. When you talk about smartphones, it's a little bit less. But the point is that there's a lot of individuals who are seeing what's happening in the rest of the world, who are seeing that kind of the clampdown that was imposed on youth or different populations and groups is not there anymore, and that there's a license to be able to creatively express yourself, but also to learn and then acquire new skills. I think that, you know, one of the things I can share now is a lot of commentary was coming saying that after COVID, if you haven't learned a new skill, you haven't spent your time well, right? And we see that with a lot of the open online courses, we see that with a lot of virtual training programs and exchange programs, mentoring as well, these are possibilities that the youth want access to. And it doesn't always have to be, I think here the silver lining is that it doesn't always have to be between, you know, North and South, or it doesn't always have to be between advanced and developing countries. I think it sometimes has to be between those that are in the diaspora in the advanced countries with their home communities in the local countries, right? And this is part of the work that I did previously before joining UNDP with an initiative called MOVAR, where we tried to do to create these linkages. But you can go to the next slide. So this is just kind of presenting things as they are, if you will, for those that are maybe new to Africa. But when we talk about emerging tech, that little cloud there just kind of, you know, covers some of the key ones that I highlight in the column on the right there. I mean, yes, Rachel talked about Internet of Things, AI, 5G, blockchain, and the like. But the issue is when we say a lot of these things to an outside audience or to an external audience, it's seldom thought of that Africa can even compete in this space. That's just the truth. You know, it's very much a model that we think where it's a very donor-driven kind of a development where, you know, when we hear somebody saying that they're working in robotics or drone technology or 3D printing, one maybe scratches their head and just kind of can't figure out how the two can complement each other. But exactly the opposite is going on. And I'll use the example of robotics to say that actually there's a lot of activity. There's an initiative called the Pan-African Robotics Competition, which every year gathers at least teams from at least 20 to 25 countries. And all of these are individuals as young as 8 years old and as senior as the grade 12 level, where they're competing at the very top level, mind you, in robotics challenges, right? And these very often are ones that you can compare to global ones, like a competition that we know of globally here in Gambia, where we also sent a team last year called the First Global Competition. So, you know, the point is to say that there are individuals that are working in these spaces, and there are initiatives and entrepreneurs that are trailblazers. They're setting the trail for others to follow. And, you know, youths are seeing that, okay, it doesn't have to be, problems don't have to be solved with the same tools of the past. I think we can see that now with robotics and 3D printing and even drone technology, we can leapfrog, if you will, a lot of what we consider to be, okay, we need investment from the global north, then we need to be able to hire consultants from also, well, the global north or expats, and then that's the only way we can solve the problem, by maybe outsourcing a few things to local companies. That model is changing, and I think a lot of young people are rejecting that model, and rightfully so. So if you can go to the next slide. So when we talked about digital transformation, right? I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind was with the advent of the cell phone, how, you know, Africa was able to just leapfrog this whole development where it required us to, you know, put up all these masts for telephone towers. And with the arrival of cell phones, what we were able to do is just leapfrog that entirely and get a massive number of individuals online and onto a digital platform where they were able to communicate instantaneously. And as it progressed, we saw also mobile money, where Africa is the leader by far. We see what's being done with the popular company M-Pesa. We see what MTN and the others are doing in that space. But what we also see is in smaller countries like Gambia, although the market is not as advanced, we do still have two telecoms that are at least competing in this space. And those are the pictures that I share on the bottom of the screen there with Kodo, and on the left it says buy and transfer. That's by another company here called Africell, which is also in 4 or 5 other African countries. But the issue here is that what we see happening is also being spearheaded and led by a lot of foreign influence, if you will. We have a lot of Asian companies, the likes of Itel, Techno, Infinix. They were able to penetrate the market, and in a matter of years, literally, carry over hundreds of millions of individuals onto a digital platform who did not have a cell phone before, right? And that, as much as it created spaces for mobile money and the like, it also created issues of sustainability. And that example was also carried over when we talk about companies like Millicom, Tigo, and Jumia. That is actually one of the largest e-commerce platforms on the continent. But what we see is that a lot of that is actually being led and spearheaded, by other companies where there's a capital flight at the end of the day. In Gambia, we see it all the time. We see it all the time in the larger countries that are not even the size of Gambia, because as the smallest country in mainland Africa, if it's an issue that's affecting a country like a Tanzania, then it just shows you the scope of the problem and exactly what we're talking about. That yes, there are possibilities to innovate, but at the end of the day, the beneficiaries of that, in financial terms at least, aren't individuals on the continent. And this is a problem which these 4IR and emerging technologies have to be able to address. Next slide, please. So when we talk about Africa and those emerging techs, so an example that was just provided briefly, because we couldn't dwell on it too much, was just on the mobile transformation and what that was able to do, right? But a lot of times what we're hearing about is these underwater cables and how we're going to bring internet to the continent. And Rachel talked about that as well, this lack of access to internet and reliable internet. I also added to that energy. But at the end of the day, what we realize is, this was a great graphic that I found, basically showing that at least 10 or more projects are currently underway to be completed by 2023, 2025, which are trying to bring internet to the continent. And this involves your big tech companies, your Facebooks, your Googles, Amazons, and Microsoft. Maybe Apple isn't necessarily having as much of activity on the continent right now, but Twitter is closely behind, and they have a lot of activity that they're planning for the continent as well. So what we're looking at is projects that have started since the start of the millennium. But at the end of the day, we are still back to square one. The excessive cost of internet is prohibiting a lot of individuals from being able to see the smartphone device as a tool for not just communicating with family, but also as a tool for being able to solve the challenges and issues that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. Rachel also talked about app development. There's a growing population and community of app developers on the continent who aren't able to express this, because at the end of the day, what they're seeing is, well, I have to pay these excessive data costs, which in Europe, because we've been to all these places, all of us here and the audience as well, we've been to these places where we see just how cheap and manageable data costs are. But in Africa, it's the entire opposite. So sometimes it's trying to expect a miracle from individuals that are doing their best, trying to make do with what they have, and at the end of the day, it's simply not enough. So this visual shows that by the end of 2023, we should have a few projects that at least provide better access to internet. One of them that affects the Gambia is called an ACE cable that runs down from, I believe it's Spain, all the way down to South Africa. And a lot of the projects, that's the route that they take. But on the eastern side of the continent, maybe there aren't as many projects. But what this does signal is a sign that of things to come, that perhaps we might be able to change the dynamic in a few years. Next slide. So just to jump then straight into things, because I would also like to discuss what's happening with UNDP and the Accelerator lab there. What we're seeing is a lot of these new spaces that weren't there before, as far as the infrastructure is concerned. We're seeing a lot of iHubs, and again, I apologize if the text here is a little bit small, but we're seeing a lot of iHubs, tech hubs, and iLabs, and these kind of creative co-working tech spaces emerging on the continent. There's a great platform called AfriLabs that kind of compiles where all these labs and hubs and spaces are. And at the end of the day, they're trying to create linkages. Some of these are much larger, like the impact hubs. And you have also MIST, which is another model that's in West Africa. So we see a lot of these spaces on the continent, and they're fairly new. But that's the case as with other parts of the world. I mean, before, when we thought of innovation and these kinds of things, we thought about it within the firm. But now with these spaces, the idea is to try to ensure that they can facilitate innovation. Whether that's been successful or not, well, to a certain degree, because I mean, again, in the previous speaker's presentation, we learned about MHub and what they've been able to do. But then we also see more and more co-working spaces popping up on the continent. And the question that I often wonder, and this is just, you know, something I'll put to the audience here, is what about the rise of fab labs and maker spaces? As we see 3D printing, which is a major component of these emerging technologies, why aren't we seeing more maker spaces and fab labs? Because we see that in parts of Africa and Asia, indeed, frugal and grassroots level innovation is really where the majority, if you want to call them the next billion, are operating. And they need spaces like fab labs and maker spaces, because they may not have the luxury of coming to a place with a personal laptop and things along those lines. And yes, some of the spaces do provide that, but this is just to highlight some of the issues. Then we're seeing also more and more incubators and labs. In the US, this has led to great success. We've seen Y Combinator and others in the West Coast achieve some great things and create some great results. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing here is the incubators, they don't necessarily benefit the startup entrepreneurs. I think they benefit more and more what we're seeing, those that manage those spaces, as opposed to the ones that are responsible for the innovation. And that is a huge problem that the continent is facing. So when we look at all of these issues, one has to consider whether there's even a regard for startup ecosystem development. And in most cases, there isn't. But on the other side of things as well, what we see absent in a lot of African countries is the lack of venture capitalists, angel investors, or just private equity. A lot of what we do is still very much public sector or donor-driven development. And once that doesn't change, or excuse me, if that does not change, it's not going to be easy to talk about emerging tech and how we're, creating innovations within those spaces. But we also need to look at how banks and financial institutions and intermediaries are engaging with these entrepreneurs. A lot of times the collateral that is requested of these entrepreneurs, it's for lack of a better term, impossible. And I think that once that is not addressed, we are still going to be scratching our heads and scratching the surface, whilst others, like we're seeing in Asia, are able to go much deeper, because I believe that there is a regard for what the MFIs there and the banks are doing in as far as being able to support these nascent and first movers who are able to just create these business ideas and companies that weren't necessarily able to compete in the space as we knew them before. So, I think the conversations needs to change from MNCs as, multinational corporations and organizations to more startups and scale-ups. What are these startups and scale-ups doing? What's happening at the firms? What's happening within firms? Do we even have firms? We talk about MSMEs a lot of the times, but in a lot of Africa, it's just the MS, if I can be frank. It's just the micro and small enterprises. And these guys, they need to be able to have a level of support where they can then scale what they're up to, whether it's in emerging tech or not. We talked about agribusiness, we talked about mobile money, but as long as they're not able to have the innovation and technological capabilities to scale, it's going to be business as usual. And it's never going to be a situation where we can talk about entrepreneurial-led development, but rather one where we keep talking about public sector and donor-driven development. So as we consider all of these, the call, I guess, to the policymakers and those within the space is to consider where the innovations are and where they're happening. In Africa, an overwhelming majority of them are in the services. But what about the industry as we talk about manufacturing? Because a lot of what we see being able to credit the growth in Asia is because of manufacturing, developing a manufacturing base and how that led to supply chain development and the like. We talk about agriculture. There's hectares and hectares of arable land on the continent, but why are we not developing them? There's a lot of young individuals who need to be able to farm on these plots, but they're leaving in search of greener pastures. And that's why we're seeing a lot of deaths in this treacherous Mediterranean route into Southern Europe. Next slide, please. So when we talk about sustainable development, I think one needs to consider, and this is where I'll segue into the sustainable development goals and what UNDP is doing. We need to consider that because we have just 10 years to achieve what are the sustainable development goals, what are going to determine basically what the future looks like in the development space, at least for the next couple of years, right? So learning networks are propping up more and more. And I give an example of two. One is called the Global Diplomacy Labs, which is run out of Europe, and Germany is the spearhead there, trying to see how they can collaborate with Africa, understand the demographic dividend better. But we also see what's happening with UNDP through the Accelerator Lab, an initiative that was created just last year with 60 labs covering 78 countries, where the idea is to try to see how to understand these innovators and these individuals that are at the very bottom of the pyramid and what they're doing to survive on a day-to-day basis. Then we also try to see what trends and patterns we can capture among this demographic and these individuals. And from there, design short and small experiments that are rapid assessments of kind of how we can have better impact within those communities and those environments. And we see that, you know, this model has been relatively successful in the short period of time to be able to create change. And there's an expansion of these labs with 20 more labs coming into being, at least by the end of this year and early next year. But then we also need to think about knowledge management when we talk about sustainable development. There is a massive problem when we think of education, frankly speaking. And I think what COVID did was expose those challenges. I really tried to avoid mentioning COVID in this presentation because it has been the centerpiece of every conversation, but it exposed the issues when we talk about knowledge management and capture, because at the end of it, we are seeing governments, at least that are running these public schools, introduce models that are simply not sustainable. So the frank truth is that we've had millions of individuals who are basically in a position where they've lost 3 months of their grade school education. So we need better knowledge management, capture and sharing and storage devices and platforms to be able to get through these challenges that aren't necessarily predictable, whether it be a pandemic or whether it just be something that is created as a result of lack of reliable access to energy. And that's a huge problem on the continent. So to skip quickly through these and get to the remaining slides, basically, when we talk about learning as well, we see a lot of transition into e-learning and these open online courses. That's leading to a lot of transformation. And I think that with the increase in individuals that are coming online, we need to make sure that data costs are reduced, because a lot of what we're seeing with this anti-immigration sentiment in a lot of parts of the world is that they're going to need to be more platforms for individuals that want to be able to attain tertiary or just new skills, if you will. And then we also need globally competitive research and innovation coming out of the continent. I mean, I'm not an academic, but at the end of the day, we do need to have this coupled with a research output that's coming out of the continent. A lot of the research output in Africa, it's less than 2% for most governments. So when we talk about the AU and the like, they're trying to encourage governments to invest more in research and in research output and development and tertiary institutions. But the country that's doing the most there is South Africa, with, I believe, under 5, between 2 and 5%. And that's the highest that we have on the continent. This needs to change significantly if we're going to be able to understand these innovations better and be able to see how we can go from more of these incremental to even a radical form of an innovation. And finally, we need sustainable skills development, talent acquisition, and retention. It cannot be a model of dependency where we have these experts coming in all the time from the advanced countries, but it needs to be cultivated from here. By here, I mean Africa, where we have these exchange programs and ensure that the talent is developed here, remains here, and can at least be shared with the other parts of the world. Because again, when we look at these massive networks, we see that a lot of what we're learning is coming also out of Africa, whether it's farming techniques, right? Whether it's even health techniques that we can see in different institutions. Sometimes they're coming out of Africa. Cambridge did a study recently where it was a Tanzanian nurse that was able to contribute to an operation that was happening at Cambridge, where at the end of the day, the expectation was the Cambridge University or Cambridge would be the one that kind of shares. It's kind of this knowledge transfer. But at the end of the day, this was only something that we were able to solve by tapping into knowledge from the continent. So what we're seeing more and more is this dependence, this global interdependence, and Africa cannot be excluded from that, frankly speaking. Next slide. And this slide emphasizes what I was saying on Africa and trying to understand it. Yes, we can talk about emerging tech and the like, but if we do not understand the scope and size of Africa, we are always going to be treating it as the stepchild, the one that's not able to, hold its own. But that's frankly unfair. If I wish we could blow up this slide a little bit more, but it basically shows Africa being able to accommodate all of the United States, China, Japan, all of Western Europe, and Russia, and there'll still be landmass left. So when you tell me that a land this massive right? And then these are, you can find this online. When you tell me that there's a landmass this massive where 2 billion people aren't even on yet, and we're putting all so much pressure to be able to justify anti-immigration policies and the like, there's a huge problem. I think there's a massive problem. If you can fit all of India and China, and there's still landmass left, and both those countries have more than 1 billion people population, then it baffles me how we can talk about Africa being at this unsustainable state. It's boiling over. They're popping into Europe and changing our culture. And all. This is unsustainable. This is not realistic. So we need to understand better and lift the lid on this continent and try to see exactly what's happening. By that, policy needs to also play a role. We need to look at IPR. That's a huge, huge problem. We need to look at intellectual property, but also data ethics, protection, and privacy. Because a lot of times what we're seeing is the data that's individual data is going to others and they're benefiting from it. This happens all the time. We have the largest transportation network not owning any vehicles in Uber. We have the greatest marketing company in Facebook not owning any content. This is the new reality that we're facing. So a lot of times the data that these big companies and big tech are using to meet their bottom lines and justify their bottom lines is coming from individuals who have no idea that their data is being used in the first place. But just again, to go through this quickly, because I know that my time is expiring, we need to look at the SDG integration into national policies as well. There's 17 goals, and each of the 17 areas has some level of applicability to these emerging technologies. ICT for these strategies, these cannot be developed by ministries of education, ministries of information on their own. Government is not known to be an innovator. Government can be an entrepreneurial state. We see that in the US. They supported a lot of technologies that we're enjoying, but they cannot be an innovator or expected to be one, outside of perhaps military technology. In Africa in particular, we're looking at the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and regional integration. And I'm just going to read through the rest again to be able to finish on time. But we also need to look at support to the informal economy and moving a lot of the micro and small enterprises from that space into the formal economy and banking more and more individuals. Finally, we need to reward innovation and creativity. As long as that is not happening, we will always have this perception that innovation and creativity is something that we import from another part of the world. Next slide. So briefly on the UNDP Accelerator Labs, I talked about it before, but this model just kind of shows maybe how we can understand emerging tech in the countries that we're talking about. So I love this visual because it shows how maybe, like innovation and entrepreneurship and maybe the challenge to development practice, right, was considered in the first section A there, where we're at the edge of the organization being UNDP and the UN system, to now being able to engage with it and understand and be able to share stories of individuals that are in different regions. And finally, being able to be at the center, not that we change the way it works, but at least being able to build a portfolio of learning experiences and experiments that we've learned that can then inform better program and policy design at that level. Next slide. So in the Gambia Accelerator Lab, one of the things that we did do, and I'm glad that CK extended the invitation, was to experiment with emerging tech. The last picture on the right there, the column, shows how we engage with 3D printing, and we did a 3D printing waste management hackathon. It's a mouthful, I know. But a couple of years ago, maybe that might have not been something that we expected. But the Accelerator Lab made it possible. The image in the middle, and again, sorry I'm moving fast, I know I've exceeded my time, is another experiment that we did working with SMS short codes to be able to have more numbers of individuals using job alerts and job matching services by reducing the registration time through an SMS short code. So all they had to do was text subs to 1820, and we were able to increase the uptake for that by 5,000%. And then the first column there just basically shows our challenge, and what that was youth unemployment. We were trying to understand youth unemployment better, and what that diagram does is one of the tools that we learned from the lab. It's called the issue mapping tool, and we were able to look at the economic, social, cultural, legal, and other tools that affect youth unemployment within the country. Next slide. Again, I can answer these questions later, but you just have to run through it quickly. Finally, on the recommendations. We need to strengthen these common markets, because a lot of times when we talk about emerging technologies, we need to ensure that they can move through borders freely as well, and so too individuals. A small country like Gambia might be where you can do a startup, but if you want to scale, one needs to tap into the Senegals, the Ghanas, and the Nigerias. We need to boost digital infrastructure. We need to consider smart cities for our continents and everything, e-government, e-commerce, e-health. We need to think e. We need to invest in R&D and research output. I'm not going to dwell on that because we talked about it. And finally, we need to introduce universal primary and secondary education, but also reform tertiary institutions with STEM integration. That is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, because that is what's going to equip this next generation that are going to be our demographic dividend to be able to compete in spaces like robotics, AR, VR, and the like. With that, I leave it here. Last slide, please. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, CK, for the invitation. For me, it's not going to be a very long presentation because I think most of the introduction and most of the points I think are similar to what Rachel and Omar were alluding to. So for me, I'm just going to go through what are the actual opportunities that are here. So one of the things, I work at the Next Einstein Forum, and this is an organization that is trying to promote Africa's scientific excellence. And we are also an organization that is under the African Institute of Mathematical Science, which is a center of excellence that is currently providing education for mathematical scientists, data scientists, AI engineers, and we were trying to support governments and different countries in terms of science education in secondary schools. But of course we bring forth the Next Einstein brings forth the part of promoting Africa as a hub where there's knowledge. We have scientists that are excelling in their fields and that are promoting Africa in general. So really, I'm just going to go back to what Omar was talking about. He was talking about the different needs that we have in Africa in terms of R&D. And one of the things that is really that brings forth that is, if you look at different countries, let's say the US or even China, you see that most of the countries, they go above 2% in terms of the R&D spending, and these are trillion-dollar economies. And in Africa, as a continent, there's no country that is currently spending above 0.8%, and that includes Egypt and South Africa. Those are among the leading countries, and that kind of gap creates, and we've seen, and it continues to perpetuate. To show that there's a sort of like 96% funding gap, and this also creates a gap in terms of the type of knowledge that we create on the continent, the type of technology that we are developing, and as well as the skills that are available on the continent. So this is one of the things that as an institution we focus on and we're trying to raise on. But one of the things that is also very compelling is the fact that it's both an opportunity but a challenge. But in this era, it is, for me on my side, I think it's a very good opportunity. As a continent, we have the youngest and fastest growing continent, and we see that every single year we have 11 million young people that are entering the workforce. So this means that there's so many young people that are looking for new jobs, and we already know that, and these are statistics that everyone is talking about, that the jobs of today or in 10 years are already, like the jobs of 10 years are not yet defined, they're not clear. So how are these young people being educated, and how can they be prepared for the market? So this is also an opportunity, because as Africa is opening up to the world, it is very clear that there's no shortage of young people that are ready to work. But now, how do we as a continent position ourselves to have skilled labor for all this? So I think most of we've talked, like Omar and Rachel have gone through some of the technological indicators that we have. For the past 10 years, we've seen really a very big uptick in terms of mobile penetration. I think mobile money in 2015, I believe, surpassed the global, in terms of transaction volume, surpassed the global transaction volume of Western Union. And that shows how much the innovation and aspect on or how I would say the market looks at Africa. So it's not like we're looking at there's money to be made and there's volume and transactions that are going on, and that is indicated in different areas. But of course, there's still a lot of areas that we have to look into, namely include internet penetration, electricity everywhere, and having access. So access to internet, access to electricity for most rural areas is one of those key infrastructure that we're still struggling with. So then when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, I believe most of us know that under the World Economic Forum, most countries are really looking at how can they be part of this particular revolution. So we all know how this revolution is going to go. We're seeing different economies coming up, namely the digital economy, circular economy, shared economy, climate economy. So all these things that are putting us in a world that is defined by green energy, sustainable production systems, and an intelligent and connected ecosystem. So, so for me, when we look at the fourth industrial revolution, and I'm going to come back to what everyone was talking about, there's so many things that we could, as a continent, we have to offer, right? So we have very good shortcomings that Omar really talked about, and that are very, very critical. But when we look at it on a global map, Africa is also one of the biggest opportunities that is still yet to be optimized. So one of the things is we look at the digital economy. It's a $300 billion industry. It's going to be in about 5 years a $300 billion industry. We look at health market, $259 billion in 10 years. And then agriculture, of course, that's $1 trillion market. Smart and sustainable cities, as well as energy, these are $1 trillion industries. And then one of the biggest thing is that I don't know if most of the audience have heard about the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. This was put in 2018. That's when the ball started rolling, and then but due to COVID, it was supposed to start operationalizing this July, but it has been moved to January. And this is going to create the biggest free trade zone in the world, and it's currently valued at 6.7 trillion in terms of consumer and business expenditure. So this is a very big market. Most African countries are looking at how to harmonize policies, support intra-continental, intra-country trade. So that means that if you're an investor coming from outside and you base yourself from Rwanda, the current policy and regulation that are being built is to facilitate you to be able to easily move from Rwanda and go to Gambia, go to Malawi, go to other countries. So all these things support that kind of bring about opportunities. But of course, all this is to say that although we have these opportunities as a continent, there's so many things that are happening. And I'll come back to this, but before that, one of the things that we're seeing is there's so many innovations that are happening. We've talked about mobile money, but there's companies like I don't know if any of you have heard of a company called Twiga Foods. Twiga Foods is in agriculture. They recently partnered with IBM to introduce blockchain in their processes, because they connect farmers to market. So they've introduced blockchain in their operations. We have companies like Flutterwave and Pagapay, etc., who are really leading in terms of fintech on the continent. So they're harmonizing intra-country, intercontinental payments, and all that. And we have other opportunities in healthcare. So I think with COVID, this is a conversation that is currently being had. So now governments are currently, because for the past like 5-10 years, most governments have been trying to implement and put together or ignite digital transformation in their country. But with this COVID, I think there's a sense of urgency that has been created to really focus on how can we move this forward and actually see implementation. We saw a few countries remove mobile money fees in terms of peer-to-peer transaction. We've seen countries that are now getting all their university in terms of digital education. We've seen a lot of ICT in education. We've seen a lot of push to ignite and create those kind of innovation. Now most countries are open to technology in healthcare. That is, so we have like some countries that are doing that are promoting, especially in diagnostics and in diagnostics, they're promoting use of digital health. Like in Rwanda and Ghana, we saw Zipline start delivering the tests that were being done into different areas to wherever they were supposed to do. And Zipline is one of those innovations that started the fast drone delivery in the world, and they started with healthcare, and they started in Africa, which is a very good thing. And also one of the things that is very interesting is that on a global perspective, there's currently a very big aspect in terms of investing in Africa. So in 2019, African companies reached more than 1.1 billion in terms of investment. So if you're coming from, if you're from Asia, Europe, and everywhere, you think this is a very small amount, but this was the first time that we actually saw a very big interest. And this is something that is currently growing. And I would say a lot of Asian venture capitalists and venture firms are actually leading in some of these funding. Some of the industries.
Just to double check, because I still see your one slide, yes. Fourth Industrial Revolution. Okay.
Yes,
I just want to make sure that we're not pausing by technical issues on that.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So so then we saw like investment for Africa in mostly fintech. That was one of the leading investment opportunities. We saw investment in energy. That's also another area that is really growing, and that's because we have about 600 million people that are not yet connected to any electricity, and that's a very big market opportunity for the continent in itself. So so as an organization like at NEF, what we've tried to do for us is try to bridge the gap between what policy and regulation looks like and how to create an innovation ecosystem. So we've developed like a science-led innovation framework where we're looking at if a country is looking into creating an innovation ecosystem, how should they go about? If you're a private sector, where do you come in and as well as and contribute? So we have mostly so knowledge creation. This is we try to engage governments in terms of investing in R&D, but also in terms of knowledge valorization. We look at how we get these research into pilots, demonstration, and then we create industries around it. So as private sector, can they start with pilot? Who are the funding mechanisms that we need to be able to scale these innovations, etc., etc. But also more importantly, when we identify these sectors that are key, like in Africa, we look at healthcare, fintech, agriculture, and energy as some of those big sectors. So what kind of skills are we looking at? So let's say one example that we did was like with the digital economy, we looked at what is the strategy that we should be adopting, and that we believe moves some of the conversation that we have. So this involves looking at what are the basic infrastructure. Even if we have internet, if people do not have access to electricity, people don't have access to ports for or even accessible roads for actual trade, then that's a very big problem. And we've already talked about digital infrastructure as a very important part. And then the regulatory part of saying, you look at your technology where you're going as an economy and design policy, not as a catch-up from what's happening, but you anticipate what may be coming. And one of the things with our community that we've been able to devise is put forth what are some of the technologies that are going to be very important for the continent. So currently, just because everyone is moving online, we're looking at cybersecurity as one of the biggest investments to be made. And there's a lot of governments that are actually putting emphasis on this. And then we're, of course, AI and big data on this. And of course, we're saying this because these are technologies that are already deploying. So one of the biggest problem is developing technologies, algorithms that are not addressing or taking into consideration the particular aspects of African behavior, Africans, either their behavior, cultural aspect, etc. And then from these, we look at IoT, blockchain, 3D printing. So when you look at this short term, medium term, it doesn't mean that this technology are not happening, but you just raise a concern that the prerequisite, which will be, we need to have a clear cybersecurity aspect to this. AI, big data should already be defined so that we can reap benefits from this. And on another perspective, in terms of when we look forward, we see that biotechnology and energy are going to be some of the sectors that propel Africa to really lead. Let's say, for example, I think some Asian countries led on the semiconductor front. So we believe some work around energy as well as biotechnology could move Africa to be also in that to that standing. And of course, this technology would inform how we develop skills in our schools, how we retrain people that are in different skills right now, and all that. So in a nutshell, one of the things that as an organization that we are really looking at is advocating for clear investment policy to attract foreign direct investment. So what are the incentives for foreign investors to come into our continents, but also how we're protecting ourselves from that, but also building a local investment pipeline to support startup growth. And then we are also promoting partnership along the way. So what does that mean? If we look at organizations that are coming from Singapore that have a specific technology, that have specific opportunity that we can tap into, how can we get that technology and bring it back on the continent, adapt it to the environment we're in, and leverage that. So that's some of the ideas that we're promoting in terms of our work. And we believe if we have clear partnerships as well as a clear investment or financing structure for innovation, those are some of the things that will propel Africa to be at the forefront of technology. But regardless of that, the market is large, that if you're a business anywhere in the world, it is very important that at this juncture, you understand African market, you try to enter the market to reap some of the benefit.
So Singapore has a good access to ventures, incubators, accelerators a lot. And I personally know some of them who are, I'm sure, will be very keen invest some of the best of the initiatives in Africa, right? So how can we help?
So yeah, I can start. I think one of the things my president always likes to say. So I'm from Rwanda. President of Rwanda always says that we are open for business and we are looking for partners. I think one of the things is if you're a company, you're very large and you want to expand this market, there's a very big market, and looking at Africa as a business opportunity is very, very key to this. One of the, like Rwanda, when we started, we have a government, we were moving to digitizing government services. I remember one of the biggest partner in terms of technology was a company from Singapore. So that was one of the companies that facilitated in terms of technology, building the technology behind digitizing the government services. And I believe it has been lucrative from both sides. So it was a partnership between a Rwandan company and a company from Singapore, and then both of them partnering with the government of Rwanda to do that. So that's one of the things. We also have something called Smart Africa that brings together private sector, and it's a very good avenue for private companies to actually understand where the opportunities, what kind of what a government looking for, etc. And you can reach out to their office to see this is what I'm interested in, and I would like to do that. So I think having in mind that you're coming to do business is very, very, very key to succeeding, as well as really gaining support from everyone.
Esther put it really well, and Rwanda is like one of the countries that we all look up to, frankly speaking. And it's going to be different for a small country like Gambia. I think for me on this side, one would be, and it goes both ways, right? It's like finding out about the stories that are coming out of the continent more. But I say it goes both ways because we need to find out how to tell our stories better. But definitely finding out about what's going on more, because then that's what's going to be able to facilitate the collaborations and cooperations and things along those lines. So that's first. And then second, I think with all the different networks that you're talking about, I think there needs to be a more South-South collaboration. I mean, where we have these kinds of fellowships and networking opportunities and programs and learning networks, very much like the one I shared with the Global Diplomacy Labs, or what Esther's, talking about with the next Einstein Forum. I think there needs to be more like that between Singapore and, say, West Africa or the like. So I think that those two could be starting points, and they can have spillovers, to use a kind of a tech innovation word here, or borrow, and we can have spillovers where we then have different programs that are coming up, whether it's just teaching fellowships. Then we have somebody like a Neha coming and working with the University of the Gambia and the like. So I think for me, it's just more the people engagement. Like, I think Esther's last slide talked about it, like that human capital and that human-centered approach to things. So finding out about our stories, but us telling them better, one, and then two, trying to create these networks of collaboration and interaction, where it's fellowships or programs like that, exchange programs, essentially. I think that could be a great step.
So I think from our perspective, what we'd be looking for is the investment readiness support. This could be in the form of technical assistance, in pairing some of the entrepreneurs that we incubate with entrepreneurs from like Singapore and elsewhere in the world to enhance peer-to-peer learning. Obviously, investment opportunities for financing are ideal and needed, but also we're looking at acting as a bridge for other partnerships that entities on that side of the world would want to establish within the country. So maybe you might not necessarily be interested in partnering with us, but maybe you want to get into a partnership with the universities here, or indeed other private sector entities, mobile network operators. We could be that bridge in facilitating the partnerships with other entities within the country. Those are the sort of things that we would be asking for. And lastly, obviously, if there are needs to solicit technical skills, let's say to build certain technology solutions. That's something that members of our network can also do and that we can oversee.
From your side, and any question for us, for me, from this region, if I can kind of represent Singapore and Southeast Asia, pretty well connected into the emerging tech ecosystem, be it IoT, as well as from the vertical side of it. So I do have a opportunity, thankfully, to even to speak to the CXOs of different organizations, both technical companies, where the big companies or the startups ecosystem, as well as I mentioned about the academia. So any question for me? Anyone?
Yeah, I think it's not a question, but a suggestion that it might be interesting in subsequent sessions to hold a sort of mix, bring, voices from the African continent and from your world, so that we can really feed into each other, learning what our colleagues are doing on that end, what their interests are, from the African continent's perspective, and also us sharing what we're doing and what our needs are, so that we can start to establish synergies and move towards real, tangible partnerships. South to north, or however way we want to call it. Thank you.
And it's something very valid feedback, and I certainly look forward to do a follow-up. On a similar note, we might pick up both sides. We'll bring a few more people together, and we might pick up either a vertical or a technology.
Rachel made a really great point, and for me, I'd just like to add on collaborative efforts. So maybe like a blog or an article that, once this joint panel can be set up, we can have maybe a joint blog or article or whatever that the speakers can then work on together to just share what's happening and put something out there as far as literary content.
I think this, again, is a very wonderful idea, actually. Jointly do some co-author research. I'm sure Neha will also be very interested in, because one of her major work, her major work is pretty much to build the insight and the research, working with various either institutions or organizations. So we're more than happy to discuss these two things for sure as a follow-up. I personally see there's a lot of synergy between, like Rachel said, whether north to south or whichever term you want to give it, we can figure it out. But one is a market size. Singapore has its own value, and I'm sure Africa is going to grow. I'm very positive about it. As I said, I've been doing a lot of research, but I haven't had an opportunity to visit to Africa. I hope get one soon, maybe with one of you or maybe all of you. Will have a chance to come down. And same time, whenever you have an opportunity to come to Singapore, you know who to reach out. So we hope to drive something tangible. Let's aim for to do something more tangible and benefit not just this audience and 4-5 of us, but the larger community. This message, I'm sure, which we have shared wonderfully, is going to go out to a lot more people in the next 1 or 2 weeks. I'm sure it will take the discussion forward. So with that, I would like to thank one more time to you, Omar, Esther, and Rachel, and especially to Neha to host this session. And I look forward to host this session more regularly in coming time. Thank you so much.